Hello, everyone. We're in the GC2Y Sex and Resistance class, and today we're going to be talking to y'all about global feminism. My name is Lindsay, and then we also have Dawson, Katie, Abigail, Savannah, and then Candler and Victoria. Okay, so like I said, today we're going to be talking about global feminism. We have three really amazing speakers here today to talk to y'all, and I hope y'all can get a lot out of this presentation.
Hey, I'm Candler. I just have a few questions for everybody before we start the presentation. And I just want to remind everybody that there are no wrong answers, just whatever comes to mind. And when you do answer, you can unmute yourself or just write it in the chat, whichever works. The first one, what does global feminism mean to you? And so I'll wait a second and see if anyone has any answers. Okay. Someone said equal rights for both genders. That's really good. Fighting for equal rights for women all around the world. Global feminism means feminism in various cultures, countries, and feminism for women and gender minorities around the world and from different backgrounds. These are all really good. Global feminism is more culturally inclusive and expansive than normal feminism. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next question. How does global feminism differ from normal feminism?
We have one person who said global feminism is more culturally inclusive and expansive than normal feminism.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, and our last question, are you aware of any feminist movements around the globe? So does anyone know of any already before we talk about? And it's totally fine if not.
Like Candler said, it's fine if y'all do not know of any, but we're going to go ahead and go on, and hopefully y'all will learn some more, possibly about some movements.
Okay, so hey guys, I'm Abigail. So we actually have a short little video for you guys to watch. It's a little over a minute, and it's actually from a TED Talk with Annie Lennox. So there's two questions. What are your takeaways from this video, and what surprised or shocked you the most? So be thinking about this while you watch the video, and then after the video is over with, we'll revisit these questions.
Are y'all not able to hear the video? Okay, how do I change that?
Do you have like headphones or anything plugged in? Or any like Bluetooth sound devices hooked up?
Yeah, I have headphones plugged in.
So it's only playing through your headphones, which is why we can't hear it.
I mean, somebody give me a heads up if you can hear it after this. I'll just start it like.
Percent of all maternal deaths occur in developing countries. Out of the 757 million adults who cannot read or write, 2 out of 3 are women. 603 million women live in countries where domestic violence is not considered a crime. Around the world, we still have a very long way to go before every woman and girl has access to equal rights. That is why we stand together as global feminists.
Okay, I know that was we're sorry about the audio. We thought it was working. Do we need to replay it so that you guys can think about the questions a little bit more, or do y'all think that y'all are ready to answer some of the questions? You could just put in the chat.
Yeah, people are saying they could read the captions and everything, so I think it's okay.
Okay, awesome. So question number 1, what are your takeaways from this video? It could be the smallest detail, it can be the biggest detail. No, there are no wrong answers. Domestic violence is normalized in some countries. Yes, that is unfortunately very true. So that women experience oppression all around the world at high statistics, that is unfortunately, yes, also very true. There are a few policies or laws to benefit women. Yeah, that's true. It is easy to forget that there are millions of women around the world who still don't have what we consider basic human rights. I really like that one because I know myself, sometimes I take for granted the rights I have here in America. So, okay. Question number 2. What surprised or shocked you the most?
This is kind of similar to the first question, but once again, like just anything from the video that stood out to you. There's no wrong answers.
The statistic about reading and the 2/3 women not being able to read out of all adults that can't. I think that really surprised me too. The raw statistics can be overwhelming for someone who doesn't realize the mass numbers of women being oppressed. That's also true. And something else to keep in mind is some of these statistics may not even be accurate, as in like they may be larger because we can't fully grasp like all the oppression that's going on in the world. The reality of women who live in difficult countries where women barely have any rights. That's also unfortunately true. So those were some great questions and answers. So I will move it on to Victoria. Thanks, guys.
Okay, so our first speaker is Dr. Sabrina Hom.
All right, hi folks. Am I visible and audible? Can anyone?
Yes, yes, you are, Dr. Hom.
Thank you. I can only see my own screen now, so thank you for that. So I'm going to talk about some lessons from feminist philosophy and feminist theory that I think that we can take with us when we start thinking about global feminisms. The first is a major theme coming out of feminist philosophy, and this is the lesson to avoid binary thinking. This is kind of black and white either or thinking, where we divide the world into two categories and act like, you know, this tells us the whole story. For example, we might divide the world into modern versus traditional cultures, or we might divide the women of the world into liberated women versus oppressed women who maybe live somewhere other than ourselves. This is, of course, a real overgeneralization, and I'll talk more about some of the nuances that are lost by this kind of either or framework. But one of the really important things to remember whenever we look at these kinds of oppositions is that for a long time, for centuries actually, these kinds of oppositions have been used to justify the imposition of Western power. They've been used to justify colonialism, and they've been used to justify other kinds of exploitation. So the narrative or the justification of colonialization sometimes is that, well, we're going in to liberate women within another culture. For example, this was one of the justifications behind the war in Afghanistan that was given. This was a justification used for all sorts of really awful policies in the United States and elsewhere. And of course, this idea that we can divide the more modern and progressive world from a kind of less progressive culture is really deeply baked into American history and culture. And I have an image here of, you know, a kind of cowboys and Indians opposition. I also have a binary thinking about good and bad on this list. And I don't put this here to suggest that, you know, we shouldn't ever make moral judgments. I'm a philosopher. I don't think that's true at all. But it is to suggest that we shouldn't jump to these kinds of conclusions, particularly when we're looking at a different cultural context that we probably don't fully understand. Another caution that comes to us very strongly out of feminist theory and feminist philosophy is to avoid savior narratives. And these are fantasies that hold that these entrenched problems elsewhere in the world can only be solved by Westerners. Who come in with their special insights. You know, they've already solved their problems and they're going to come and solve it elsewhere. I have an image here from an Instagram called Barbie Savior, which parodies the kinds of imagery and the kinds of narratives that come out of this. So a lot of times you have these pictures of Westerners and people from the global North who go on a very expensive trip elsewhere in the world. You know, they treat themselves to, you know, multi-thousands of dollars worth of plane tickets to go somewhere in the developing world. And then they do some, you know, quite unskilled charity work. They hand out dollar store toys or something like that, and post a lot of pictures and talk about how they're solving the problems of the world. You know, of course, this is a celebration of some pretty ineffective actions. And of course, it is often also quite degrading or exploitative to the people who are featured. Aside from that degradation, the celebration of ineffective work, that savior narrative also ends up distracting us from problems and inequities at home. So if we pat ourselves on the back for being the liberated ones, if we look back at the Annie Lennox video, she said, well, some countries made a lot of progress and others didn't. Right. So if we pat ourselves on the back for being the some who did, then it's really too easy to forget the fact that, I mean, just to look at some of the examples from the video talking about voting, talking about maternal health. There are huge inequities and problems in those areas in the United States. And these are things we really have to attend to. And of course, the savior narrative also conveniently lets us forget that the problems that are faced in other parts of the world are often actually outsourced from the US or from other colonial powers. So we're not necessarily innocent in all this. One of the examples that always comes to mind is when we talk about access to reproductive rights. The US has actually been a huge roadblock in extending reproductive rights and health access for women throughout the country. And that is because intermittently, depending on the political power that is ascendant in the United States, the US will just refuse to fund any kind of maternal and women's health initiative if it has anything to do with abortion. So they won't fund a health program, even if there's another separately funded aspect of that relates to abortion. And this is in countries often that, maybe have no religious or kind of social objections to abortion. So we see it's actually very complicated in terms of how someone in the United States or in the global North is situated in regards to the activism and the efforts and needs of women in other parts of the world. So what are some of the things that we do want to do in the context of global feminism? Well, I think there are certain things that we really need to keep in mind when we think about different cultures and different contexts. All cultures contain a diversity of perspectives, positions, experiences, and opinions. And no cultures are quote unquote traditional to the extent that they literally don't change, right? That they're these static, unchanging things. And look, I teach logic. So when I say all and none, I really mean it. I literally mean it. This does not exist. So there are people in every society who are looking to make a change. So we never want to generalize about other cultures. But instead, we want to really look for who are the people within that context who have wonderful ideas and plans, and what are the ways to be a supportive partner and let them take the lead. This also involves recognizing that what we do within our context of Milledgeville or Georgia or the United States is also local, right? This is one little piece of a whole diverse set of global feminisms. So the particular strategies and practices and approaches that we center might not work elsewhere. And sometimes this is a real difficulty in global feminism, where women from the global north or activists from the global north might feel like, they can set the agenda elsewhere without pausing to think about, well, and to hear, well, what makes sense in that other context. A major theme in feminist philosophy around this area has to do with how we really can learn from others and learn from others in a way that values and centers their difference, that doesn't erase that kind of difference. I think something we see is that these kinds of partnerships really require trust and respect. Sometimes when we look at how international efforts are set up, they're not necessarily set up with that trust for partners who are elsewhere, and that's hugely important. It's very important to go into these spaces open to uncertainty and surprise and discomfort and mistakes, and that means precisely not to go into this setting feeling like you already know, right? Like you're here to help and you're here to fix something, to identify problems and make them go away. So that kind of openness is very important. And finally, I think it's really important to be open to learning from other cultures. This is why it's very important to set aside this idea that, some countries have made progress, and that's great. And other countries are the places where women are oppressed, and they need to learn from us. The fact is, no one has a monopoly on progress or on gender justice. And we as Americans can learn a lot from looking at other countries, both in the global north and the global south, who have gone way further than we have in terms of pay equity, in terms of women's political representation, in terms of anti-poverty programs. One of the things I'm really excited about right now within the new stimulus bill is per child payments to help support families and to raise children and oftentimes mothers out of poverty. This is a huge bit of progress for the United States, and it's inspired by similar programs that we know that they work because these policies are in place in many places all over the world, including places like, Bangladesh is a leader in that kind of program. So when we look to the globally, not just with this sense of we're the fixers, but with this openness to learning, I think we can really accomplish a lot more together, and a lot more even for ourselves locally. I have some further readings here. I can share this afterward. This is just a list of some of the really lovely pieces of feminist philosophy and feminist theory that I've drawn from to make this list, and I'm happy to share that.
Okay, so our second speaker is Dr. Teran.
Hi, everyone. Okay, let me, oops, it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Just 1 second, we'll get that fixed for you.
Okay, all right.
And thank you so much, Sabrina, for being here with us and speaking, sharing your knowledge and your experience. If you guys have any questions for Sabrina or any of the other speakers, just put them in the chat, and hopefully at the end we will have time to get to some of those and they can address your questions.
And Dr. Teran, you should be a co-host now and should be able to share your screen.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And let me see if, okay, so when everyone can see the presentation now?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this invitation. I want to clarify, as you can see there on the first slide, I have a PhD in Hispanic linguistics, and I've been doing applied linguistics in general. So I have to admit that I am no expert in gender studies. I would love to do the certificate. Maybe that's something I should talk to about with Sunita and Sabrina. But let me show you today Argentina and feminism. And I see that I did a lot of research to put up this presentation, and you will see that many of the things I included are in Spanish, but I will be translating. But if you see the title, I just realized that I said Argentina y el feminismo. So, well, I guess at this point you realize that I am from Argentina, and that's why I chose to talk about feminist activism in my country. So let me do a presentation mode. That's probably better. So I will show you some hard data in relation to gender violence and femicides in Argentina. Then I will talk a little bit about women's resistance and activism, some victories that were gained, and then the role of symbolism and language in the feminist movement. So, okay, I don't think, okay, I'm sorry, I can't move on, so I will have to, okay, there, I'm sorry. Good, so to those of you who are wondering where Argentina is, hopefully that is not your case, but you can see the green country at the very bottom of South America. We have a total population of 45 million, and then you can see that we are pretty much divided into men and women. So how about the data? I want you to take a look at this. This is data that comes from the Observatory of Women in Argentina. And they have been documented gender violence in my country, and it's an organization. And you can see, I will share this PowerPoint to everyone later. You have access to the links. But so far, between the 1st of January 2021 and the 7th of March of this year, 55 femicides were committed. You can see that 47 kids lost their mothers, okay? 9 out of those 55 had gone to the police department, and 38% of these femicides were committed by by these women's partners or former partners. And there's a lot more to it. They happened, 40% of them happened at this victim's house. And I know Sabrina said we should not use the word victim. I'm no expert, I'm sorry. Now I wanna show you the data, okay, relating to femicides from 2015 and 2020 in Argentina. So take a look at it for a couple of seconds. 1,450 femicides. And you can also see, you know, how that is divided into the different years from 2015 to 2020. 64.6% of these femicides were committed at the victim's house. 45% of them were committed by the victim's partner. There is one femicide in Argentina every 30 hours. 1,527 children lost their mothers. And the story goes on and on. But let me tell you a little bit about how women in Argentina resist and how they fight. And to me, it is an honor to be talking to you about that. I was thinking, how should I tell this Argentinian feminist story? And so I want to tell you, this is a story of colors and a story of scarves and a story of symbols through language. I would say feminist activism dates back in time. And so you have a popular newspaper, La Voz de la Mujer, the voice of women. This was a communist anarchist newspaper, and their motto was no God, no master, no husband. There's another picture about the first national women's convention in 1986, where women in Argentina started, you know, being actively involved in the fight for their rights. And then you can see there the image, the picture of Eva Perón, Perón's wife. And well, she was a major figure, political figure that well, led to actually the feminist vote in Argentina in 1947, and Argentinian women were able to vote for the first time in national elections in 1951. Then I cannot not talk about this activism of Madres y Abuelas de Plaza de Mayo, and these are the mothers and grandmothers of the May Square, and this May Square is in Buenos Aires. It is the square that where the major social and socio-political struggles, protests in my country take place. These mothers, as you can see, they're on this on the streets, protesting against the disappearance of their children, who were arrested during the military dictatorship that occurred in my country in the 1970s until 1983. So they decided to take the lead and to take that fight to the streets and start, you know, asking the questions: where are our kids? Where are our sons and daughters? And something that happened at that point, if you see the question that is posted there, where are the millions of babies that were born in captivity? So these people that were arrested, the women, many of them were pregnant. They were taken to clandestine detention centers, and they gave birth in those centers, and the military appropriated those kids. Okay. Now of course, the fight goes on, and I don't have time to tell you all of it, but I can answer questions later. Now, in 2015, that was a key year, right? Up until that point, there have been a high number of femicides in Argentina, and then this final, femicide of Chiara Perez in Santa Fe in Argentina, and then a group of activists, journalists, intellectuals decided to, go to the streets on June 3rd, 2015, with this motto: not even one less, and that is not even one woman less. We want all of us to be alive. Ni una menos, vivas nos queremos. And so Ni Una Menos was the fight that was taken into the street, like I told you, but it became this feminist collective that started, actively fighting against gender-based violence. And so it became this huge collective that fought not only for women's violence, right, but for all kinds of violence and transgender violence. And here is where one color, I told you, this is a story of colors. This is where one color and one scarf surfaces. And this is the purple scarf with the logo of Ni Una Menos, not even one less. And I don't know if you can see it, but I have it here and I'm wearing it. Now, in 2018, the green wave emerged out of this feminist collective. And this green wave, as you can see, another color emerges. And this color represents the activism for reproductive rights in Argentina. So people took that fight to the streets again, and we were fighting for the legalization of abortion, for the use of contraception to avoid abortion, and for the right to sexual education in schools to prevent, okay? And here is where the green scarf is born, okay? And I have it here too, right? And this scarf, as you can see, has all these, okay, all the fights are can be seen here, right? The legalization of abortion, contraception, and sexual education. Now, in 2018, this bill, okay, passes the House, but it's not approved in the Senate. And you may be wondering what happened later. So the green wave became louder and stronger. That's what I decide to say. But of course, this fight was not easy. And the Senate did not pass in 2018 the law because, as you can see there, there's another color. This is the orange color. And this is the orange scarf that emerged during this fight. And this was another fight. We do not want the Catholic Church to have the final say. We do not want the Catholic Church to tell us how to live our lives, right? And like I said, due to this Catholic presence and power, right, the Senate decided not to pass this major law. Like I said, it was not only about abortion, it was about reproductive rights. At that point, the followers of the Catholic Church also emerged in their fight with another color, the light blue color, and their fight was, let's save the two lives, okay? Now, like Sabrina showed us in December 2020, this fight and this plea for this major reproductive law was taken to the political realm again. Finally, the House approved or passed the law. The Senate also passed the law. And today it is law, es ley. Now, I wanted to tell you too about how this feminist movement used language as a symbol. And so as we were fighting, many important words circulated. And you can see, of course, we started talking about patriarchy and sorority, sisterhood, and collectives. I decided to choose some other expressions, lexical expressions, like tocan a una y tocan a todas. You touch one and you touch us all. Que sea ley, we want this to become a law. Then, this 8M paro, this is a strike, the international women's strike in Argentina, brought about by this collective, Ni Una Menos. So every 8th of March, the International Women's Day, there is a strike, right? And we strike against violence. And so, of course, many people will complain about that. And you can see over there, I don't know if I'm marking it, but it says, disculpen las molestias, pero nos están matando. So it is, excuse the inconvenience, but you know what? They're killing us. And then there's something else here called, that says, somos niñas, no madres. We are kids, we are not mothers. And of course, that has to do with the fact that many, unfortunately, many female kids have been raped, have become pregnant, and still the Catholic Church would oppose to an abortion, even in those cases. I want to tell you something else about language. In Spanish, we mark gender. So there's grammatical gender. Spanish is a gender language. Gender is marked in some pronouns, in nouns, in adjectives, in some articles, and you can see an example there, los niños buenos y las niñas buenas. So as you can see, the O stands for the masculine gender, and then the A for the feminine gender. You have the translation there. And then when referring to a group of both females and males, Spanish defaults to the masculine, los niños buenos, the good boys and the good girls. Now, this institution, linguistic institution that regulates the use of Spanish in Spain, the RAE, Real Academia Española, it was in it was in January 2020. They said the masculine as default gender is a mere linguistic fact that does not affect the visibility of women, their respect, or their access to sectors of society. Now, the feminist movement in Argentina, they decided to use language as a weapon to question the status quo. And so they decided to replace a, o, for e, to mark other genders, to bring awareness that we should not be talking about binary gender. The good boys and the good girls. You might imagine that the Argentinian Academy of Letters did not like this. And the president of that academia says, and I quoted that in Spanish, but basically that a language, a linguistic body cannot invent itself or reinvent itself overnight. We cannot replace letters such as a, I, o, right, that differentiate gender, that mark gender, with at or with x, right, just because we want to do it, right, just because we are, denouncing a violent society. But then another researcher that belongs to the same academia, he does not agree with the position of this institution. And he says, this inclusive language is a discursive hallmark in the history of many political and human fights, okay? And he brings in something that he says that the whole point of the feminist movement in doing this linguistic twist was not to become a new grammar, but to, help us make violence against women visible. And I want to finish off with this. What I find, imagine I am a linguist, and what I find very telling and surprising is this message that the feminist movement wanted to convey. We are no longer submissive. We are no longer accepting of the status quo, of the patriarchal system, and of the assigned gender roles that have been historically imposed. And we will take this fight to the streets, and we will even do so by trying to change the grammar of our language.
Okay, so thank you so much for coming and speaking and taking time out of your day to do that for us. We really enjoyed hearing you. So our last speaker is Dr. Manian, and you can go ahead and take the floor.
All right, so I'm going to be sharing my screen now. And let's see. All right, good. I promise you, Dr. Hom and I did not speak beforehand about this, but you're going to see a sense of deja vu here. We're going to talk about, I'm going to say some of the same things that she said. In fact, after I watched the video, I actually put together a quick slide to address the video as well. Thank you all for finding that video. I think it raised some important issues around the world. Thank you for sharing that. I do want to say that a video like that in a lot of ways does what Dr. Hom was telling us not to do, which is demarcate the world, dichotomize them as the place where women have rights and the place where people don't have rights. That's the traditional versus the modern society. So I wanted to sort of give you some examples of this first. So one of the things they said, how maternal mortality was terrible in, as they said, developing countries. So the maternal mortality in the US is 19 per 100,000 in 2020. However, if you look at Black women in the US, the rate is much higher. It's 37.1 per 100,000. And this is actually similar to Egypt, right? So when we think about, we are so much, we do things well and people there, for various reasons do badly, we miss something. And many countries, including Iran and Turkey and 60 other countries, do better than 19 per 100,000. Okay, the number for Iran is 16 per 100,000. Again, I'm not saying those countries are somehow bastions of, gender rights or anything like that, but I wanted to kind of problematize this idea that things are so terrible in all the other places and let's feel bad about them and do something about it. Do something about it, but critique ourselves as well. And another part of this is, and this is something I know that Dr. Hom touched upon as well, we forget the role that our own trade and foreign policy plays in many of these things. Dr. Teran was talking about the dictatorship in Argentina. We propped it up, right? So we need to talk about those aspects of what we have done around the world, how our trade policy is actually hurting people in other parts of the world. When we talk about so many things like lack of education, why is that? It has a lot to do with policies of World Bank, the IMF, the World Trade Organization. So if you're really interested in engaging in global feminism, it's actually kind of boring business, but you have to make it your business if you really want to make a difference, right? You have to be engaged with what policies our government is imposing. Right now, for instance, at the World Health Organization, the two countries, India and South Africa, asked for us to break the patent for vaccines for COVID. And the United States and a bunch of other countries vetoed this, right? So who is going to be looking after the people who are sick with COVID? It's going to be women. And so we have to be aware of what it is we do. Now to get to sex and resistance in India, which is the country that I'm most familiar with, which is my original presentation. And here again, Dr. Hom and I did not share our screens, but we have the same image. This is of the Chipko movement, which was a movement, a women's movement from 1973. And so I'm going to give examples of resistance in India. I'm going to speak less critically about various things going on in India. I do that in many other places, and we can talk about it if we have time. But since the theme is resistance, I want to give some examples of that. So the Chipko movement was a movement led by women against deforestation. And like I said, a lot of these grassroots activism by women is for bread and butter issues. So women traditionally are the ones who gather fuel and water to feed the family, right? So deforestation directly affects women's ability to contribute the way they would based on the very gendered division of labor within families. And so this is going on, like I said, in 1973, before the term ecofeminism was really as well known as we use it today. But that was 1973, but we can come to our present day. Right now in India, there's a huge farmers' protest going on. And what you see in this image, as you can see, these are just thousands of women, farmers, attending a rally. And this is another image of the women. So these protests have been going on since November, where farmers are asking so the Indian government brought a law that's going to be empowering large corporations and hurting farmers. And what a Chief Justice said in January, he asked women and the elders, as well as people who are disabled, to leave the protests and go back to their villages, and that they will negotiate, sort of rethink the laws and that sort of thing. And here's what a woman who was interviewed said about that. She said, "Something snapped in us when we heard the government tell women to go back home." This is a 74-year-old woman saying this. And she said, "Why should we go back? This is not just the men's protest. We toil in the fields alongside the men. Who are we if not farmers?" And another woman, also in her mid-70s, said, "I'm an illiterate woman. I cannot talk well, but I can sit tight. And I will sit here till the next elections if these laws are not called off." And so, as I said, this is something going on right now in India, and women, and I'm not just talking about young women, we are talking with, women who are teenagers all the way into their 70s, sitting in since November protesting. Another thing that happened in India since the video talked about the lack of parliamentary representation, in 1993, power was given in India to villages for self-government. They're called Panchayats. 33% of the seats in Panchayats are required to be held by women. And these are some women who are the leaders of their Panchayats. And, this has led to a lot of changes. Again, we're not there. And in one of my other screens, I'm going to show how that, India fares pretty poorly in most aspects. But here are some other rights movements in India. So this is some examples of sex worker rights and transgender rights protests. So this is sex workers in India asking to be allowed to have trade union representing them. Here's another protest where sex workers are saying sex work is work and to be recognized as workers. And another sign that says sex workers demand worker rights. Transgender rights is another important point at which people have come together to resist traditional norms, or traditional as in what exists right now. Both sex workers as well as people who are transgender had a lot of rights in pre-colonial India. That's a whole other story. But at the moment, they didn't have rights, and these are people fighting for it. Something that we often hear in the US and in Europe is, yes, let's have sex workers, let's not throw them in prison, but let's imprison their clients, okay? That seems great. And here are sex workers protesting against that as well. I have an image of that. So here's what some of this activism did. In 2011, when the census was going to be taken, all these protests led to two big changes. Here's a quote: "In the new addition to the census form, the third gender would be counted as others besides male and female genders. This allows for non-binary identities in all documents, including passports." So in the US, for instance, you have a patchwork of laws in different states based on IDs and whether you can indicate a gender other than male, female. And what you find, and passports, though, you cannot right now in the US. And that's something you can do in India. And in 2014, the Supreme Court had another landmark decision that protects the rights of transgender persons. Also, another thing that came about in that census is that prostitution was going to be given a separate category as an occupation. This established sex work as work and allows women, sex workers, to demand worker protections. Does that mean things are great in India if one is of non-normative gender, or if one is a sex worker? Absolutely not. We have a long way to go. But the resistance, the protests have led to these changes that are a step in the right direction. Sex work is not illegal in India, but solicitation is, which in effect criminalizes sex work. And I have worked with sex workers, and I can tell you, no matter any of this, things are still pretty awful for sex workers. And it's worse in some states than others. And like I said, I wasn't going to spend a whole lot of time criticizing, because I could go on forever, for a week, if I started doing that. But in general, India does a poorer job than its economically poorer neighbors when it comes to education and maternal health and many other issues. This is a picture of me when I was working with some women, talking to them about HIV, because one of the things I learned when I was doing an ethnographic study of HIV in India is how little women who are not sex workers and are not in one of the groups that are called the vulnerable population, kind of don't have any information about HIV, STDs, and so on. So abortion, though, is legal in India. It has been since 1973. It was not much of an issue. It has not been much of an issue. The Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act was in fact amended last year so that women can get an abortion. It increases the time. It goes from 20 to 24 weeks, and that women can get an abortion. And it also allows people to, have an abortion because of contraception failure. And it also takes away language about married woman and husband and so on. It just says it's available to any woman or her partner. However, one would think, given, I said this in last year as well, one would think that abortion rights are something that give women rights, and it sort of, goes against patriarchy. However, in India, abortion rights have been put to good use by patriarchy, and abortion is actually used as a way of sex selective abortions. And as a result of that, and just because of discrimination in the family on who gets what kind of nutrition, who gets to taken to the doctor if they're sick, if there's a boy and a girl, what has happened is we have what is called a sex ratio that is, so typical. Okay, let me explain what this is. Typically, in any society where girls and boys have equal access to medical care and nutrition and so on, you should have more girls than boys, more women than men. In India, there's a reversal of the sex ratio, so that instead of, for every 1,000 men, instead of having more women, we only have 943 women per 1,000 men. Okay, so you can imagine how many women or girls are just not born, or if they're born, they die prematurely. Okay. So how are we doing for time? I don't need to go through this. Are we at 4? I know you wanted to end at 4. Yeah, it's exactly 4. So this is a quote from a young woman who was HIV positive, didn't have much of an education, but went on to get an education afterwards. So I won't go into that, so we can stick to the time. But thank you all.
Thank you so much for coming and speaking as well. We really enjoyed hearing yours too. Thank you so much. Okay, so does anyone in the chat have any questions to ask any of our 3 speakers? And if so, could you put it in the chat and say the speaker's name beside it so they could specifically answer the questions, or just a speaker who sees the question can answer it first?
And while y'all are typing, I'm going to have this up on the screen. These are some nonprofits that we have found. They're also going to be on our website, which is in the chat. So while y'all are typing, just take a look at these as well. But we're just going to take another couple of minutes to let each of the speakers answer a question.
We have a question, and they're asking if you could tell a little bit more about the quote from Priya, which I believe is the quote. Yes, okay.
Sure. Yes. So, one of the things when I would talk to HIV positive women who had become positive because their husbands were truck drivers or, worked elsewhere, became HIV positive and gave them HIV as well. Many of them were widowed, and they knew not. When I talked to them, unlike when I talked to female sex workers, I would always come home feeling very empowered because they seem to know how to protect themselves and so on. You don't think of sex workers being, we think of them as being vulnerable, right? But instead, they've been empowered in a lot of ways to know how to protect themselves. But these women, because of the Indian notion that women have to be protected from ideas from sex, and it enshrines marriage as something sacred and, where people are safe, women who are married simply, or even before marriage, simply are not empowered to protect themselves, to negotiate sex with their husbands in a way that protects them. And so people like Priya, she was very young. She was only 18 when she realized she was HIV positive, and she was pregnant. Her husband died. But after that, she became, so she got a degree to work as a social counselor. And what she tells me is, what she told me was how when she would go and speak to people who are HIV positive, she said, they can believe me in a way that they won't believe you. the way she put it. And she was telling me how incredibly empowered she felt. She felt like, well, even if I have HIV, it came for a reason. Now I can, help all these people. And so in these small ways, these women are resisting the roles that they've been that society has ascribed to them.
Thank you so much. I think we did have another question. This one asked just for Dr. Hom. In what way do you think on campus we could do better about enforcing gender equality and things like that?
That's a great question. I don't know that it should be just for me. I'd love to hear what our other panelists have to say about it. But I agree with my colleague that bread and butter issues are where my mind goes first. I think this campus could do a lot more to support the work of our wonderful Women's Center, and to I think we have a ways to go in terms of policies that really support anyone who's dealing with sexual abuse or violence, gender-based interpersonal violence, things like that. I also think that the whole USG could go a long way in terms of supporting people on family medical leave. We don't, there's zero paid leave for any employee of the university who gives birth or adopts a child or anything like that. So there's some of the things that come to mind for me.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much. And then I think we have a final question for Dr. Teran. It says, how do you think we can help others who want to be more educated about women's issues in other countries?
Hi. So the first thing that comes to mind is we want to know more about other countries. We should know more about other countries. And this idea of self-education, I think that at this point in time, there is so much out there that we can find about what is, this gender-based violence issues, and then the activism that is going on around the world. I am seeing that many questions here. Okay, give me 1 second. I mean, if you ask me as an educator, I do feel that we should bring these topics to the classroom, and that we should find ways to give visibility to these issues, or this issue around the world, in whatever area we specialize in. I think that as educators, if we want to gain more gender equality, we need to bring this to the classroom. And then I see another question. I don't know if we have time. Do you see the change from gender Spanish to happening in the near future in Latin American countries? Or do you think the resistance is too strong? I do think that the resistance is too strong. I think I was listening to kind of a TED talk by Mariana Gabarrot, and she said, we are perfect sons and daughters of the patriarchal system, which means we are very prescriptivist. We are very prescriptivist with the language. And so there is a lot of resistance. And that's why I said in my presentation, language is a disruptive weapon. There's a great deal of disruption when you're trying to change the grammar of a language. To me, linguists will say, no, there is no way the grammar of a language will change. I do not agree with that. I think that language change is a fact. We've seen it. It is a fact in cross-linguistically. And we have seen that grammars have changed. Whether this particular change will be, become effective and definitive in the Spanish language, that's an open question.
We want to thank everybody for coming today, and thank you to the speakers for speaking. We really liked your insight on everything that y'all had to say. It was all very interesting, and I think it's very important for us to be more educated on things like this. But once again, thank you everybody who came today. We really appreciate your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much, everyone. It was really interesting.
Thank you for organizing this.